Hey everybody, it's David coming to you today from Grand Central Station in New York City, my favorite extended weekend getaway probably in the world. Absolutely love coming here. The weekends are very quiet for the most part here at Grand Central Station. If you've never been here during the week, it's really crazy here. So, wanted to go over MSOM 601, by the way. Wanted to go over Lesson 4 review and Lesson 5 preview for you. Lesson 4 had two discussion questions, as we typically do each week. The first discussion question had you watch a video and then talk about don't sweat the small stuff. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard that phrase before, and certainly I've heard it. One of my key strengths, as measured by Strength Finders, is I'm strategic. And so strategic individuals really don't like to sweat the small stuff. They like to look at the big picture. But we should be very grateful that there are people out there who look at all the details, because sometimes the best laid plans from a strategy perspective, if they don't follow some of the small components, things can break down. And that's the key message coming through that, particularly in critical thinking. You begin to think about all the elements and all the aspects of critical thinking, and attention to detail can be one of those areas that, depending on your thinking style, may be missed. So I enjoyed the conversation that you had on that one this week. The second discussion question focused on really two truths. Now, that whole book, we don't have the entire book as one of the ebooks, but I would encourage you, I think the author's name is Gunther. Those are very short reads, each one of those truths, but I would encourage you, if you don't have if you haven't read through a lot of those, to go out and buy that book. It's really a good one. The one truth that we talked about is it's better to make a wrong decision than no decision. Now, on the surface, that may appear to be a foolish statement. However, if you make decisions sometimes, and through that you have some degree of learning, sometimes you may be better off than those people who never got off the ground to start with. You may, if you make some decisions and they're wrong decisions, you may have adapted and started down the right pathway, while others are still contemplating which pathway to go down. And so don't always just look at things on the surface and discount them out of pocket. Always try to look at both sides of the arguments on those. Okay? So that was the first truth that we saw. The second truth was get 80% of what you need and act on it. Now, this is a hard one for me as well. I tend to like to analyze things. If you remember, my I don't know if I told you this or not, but my critical thinking style is analytical. And so I like to have analysis on things, and sometimes that analysis, as one of our books says, can turn into paralysis. And so many times for people who are like that, they may be better off if they get 80% and then act on it. Again, another critical thinking exercise that you can talk about. I appreciate your responses on that this week. The application exercise this week talked about bias, and bias is one of the biggest things in my viewpoint. Don't cite me on that, but if I wrote a paper, I'd probably do research on it about bias. And bias will be one of those things that I think is the downfall of critical thinking. I see way too often, as a matter of fact, I'm not on Facebook anymore, because there would be people who would forward stuff that's obviously not true. They wouldn't think about it. They wouldn't look at it. They would just blindly share something or forward something. Or they'll just blindly listen to the talking heads on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC and think because it's said on there that it's fact. Well, what I would encourage everyone to do, whether they're taking this class or not, is to make sure that you prove your sources. That's why I make a lot of statements on your papers about avoiding definitive words like all, always, will, in favor of using could or some. So just make sure in your writing in particular, and then also in your thoughts as well, that you'll look at those things more from a biased perspective going forward. All right? So that is Lesson 4. Lesson 5 coming up really talks about assessing the audience. Now, this may not be one of those topics that you think about when you think about critical thinking and problem solving, but certainly assessing the audience is critical in a lot of different activities that you'll have in your personal life, your professional life as well. This is one of the key things for me, and with a background in sales and sales management, that assessing your customer, assessing the people who you're going to give a presentation to, very, very important. And so the first discussion question talks about assessing the audience and determining the connections that the audience may have to the problem at hand. Many times you may go into a presentation and not know the elements of and the keys that the people are bringing in there. All of them are bringing in certain things. They may be bringing in biases. Think about red. You may need to recognize the assumptions that those people are bringing into the presentation you're making, the dialogue that you have with them. And so making sure to clearly assess the audience, assess the individual, recognize the assumptions they bring in are very, very key in problem solving. So that's discussion one. Discussion two this week is a video that I hope you find very interesting. You may see this video again in your negotiating class because the author, the person who's on this video also had written the book, The Walk from No to Yes. And there are several key elements. I'm not going to mention them here. I just want to make sure you can pull them out of that video. Of all the videos that I have in this entire course, this is the one I think that has the most meaning to me as you go forward. And so the understanding of how this individual and the experiences that he had assessed the audience, I think, is going to be very important. And it'll be a very good example that you'll be able to comment on this week. And then finally, the application this week talks about empathy, and it talks about sincerity, and it talks about when you can combine empathy and sincerity, you get to persuasion. Now think about that as it relates to audience, as it relates to solving problems, because you may have empathy, but you may not be sincere about it. You may be sincere about your emotions, but you may not be empathetic. But when the two come together, when empathy and sincerity come together, it can sometimes result in persuasion, which means that you've accomplished the task. Okay? I hope you all have a great week. I'm going to be back home in a couple of days, but as always, I'm accessible wherever I am in the world. So have a great week. Keep studying. Here comes my finger.